The most dangerous rescues are the ones that begin with a single impossible choice. Rain poured over downtown Chicago in shimmering sheets, turning every traffic light into a blurred ribbon of red and gold across the wet pavement. People hurried beneath umbrellas, keeping their eyes on their own destinations, pretending not to notice the young woman standing barefoot beside a closed flower shop with a suitcase no bigger than a carry-on and a face that carried far more exhaustion than fear. Ava Brooks had learned long ago that fear eventually became quiet. It settled somewhere behind your ribs until it no longer screamed. Tonight, she wasn't running because she believed someone would save her. She was running because staying one more minute would mean surrendering the last piece of herself she still recognized. Her dark curls clung to her face as the cold October rain soaked through her denim jacket. A bruise hidden beneath her sleeve throbbed with every heartbeat, a reminder of promises broken so many times they no longer sounded like promises at all. 6 years earlier, she had believed love was supposed to make the world feel bigger. Instead, hers had slowly become smaller, limited to permission, apologies, and carefully measured silence. Across the street, headlights swept over the sidewalk as a black Cadillac Escalade rolled toward the intersection with deliberate calm. Inside, Gabriel Castellano sat motionless in the rear seat, his tailored charcoal suit untouched by the storm beyond the tinted glass. At 38, the white-haired legacy of one of Chicago's most powerful crime families had earned a reputation that reached boardrooms and back alleys alike. Rivals feared his patience more than his anger because patience meant he was thinking, and when Gabriel thought, entire empires shifted without a single raised voice. He rarely looked out the window during late-night drives, but something about the lone figure standing in the rain caught his attention. She wasn't asking strangers for help. She wasn't crying. She simply stood there clutching the small suitcase with both hands, as if it contained the only future she still owned. Then another vehicle stopped abruptly beside the curb. A man stepped out, calling Ava's name with forced warmth that fooled no one who listened carefully. She stiffened without turning around. Even from inside the SUV, Gabriel noticed the tiny movement. It wasn't the reaction of someone greeting an old friend. It was the reflex of someone whose hope had learned to hide. The stranger reached toward her, speaking rapidly, smiling for passing pedestrians as though this were merely an emotional reunion. Ava took one careful step backward. Her voice barely carried through the rain. "Please, just let me go." The man continued forward anyway. Gabriel's driver glanced into the rearview mirror, waiting for instructions that usually never came. Their route home was already planned to the minute. Meetings were scheduled. Security teams were expecting them. None of this belonged in Gabriel Castellano's evening. Yet he continued watching the woman who refused to raise her voice, even while every muscle in her body pleaded for distance. For reasons he couldn't explain, she reminded him of something his grandmother had once said before she died. The strongest people rarely ask for rescue because they've spent too long believing no one is coming. Gabriel reached for the polished silver handle beside him. The bodyguards exchanged silent looks as the rear door opened into the rain. Expensive Italian leather shoes touched the flooded sidewalk, followed by a man whose quiet presence altered the air around him before he spoke a single word. The city seemed to pause with him. Raindrops slid from his dark overcoat as he closed the distance between himself and the frightened woman with measured confidence. His blue eyes never left the stranger standing in front of Ava. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm enough to disappear beneath the rain, yet powerful enough that everyone nearby heard every word. "She leaves with me." The stranger looked at Gabriel with the confident smile of a man who had spent years believing charm could erase every line he crossed. Rain dripped from the collar of his expensive jacket as he laughed softly, glancing from Gabriel to Ava with theatrical disbelief. "This is a private matter," he said. "She is upset. Couples argue. She belongs with me." Ava lowered her eyes, not because she agreed, but because she had heard those words so many times that they echoed before anyone spoke them. Belongs. It was always the same word, wrapped in different voices, carrying the same invisible weight. Gabriel studied the man without the slightest change in expression. Years of negotiations had taught him that the loudest person in any confrontation usually possessed the least control. His attention shifted briefly toward Ava. She was soaked from head to toe, shivering despite trying to hide it. her fingers gripping the worn suitcase until her knuckles turned pale. She never once stepped closer to the man calling her back. Instead, almost without realizing it, she had taken half a step toward Gabriel. It was a movement so small that most people would have missed it. Gabriel did not. "What is your name?" he asked her quietly. She hesitated before answering. "Ava Brooks." Her voice was gentle, carrying the exhaustion of someone who had spent too many nights apologizing for things that were never her fault. Gabriel nodded once, then looked back at the stranger. "She answered my question, not yours." The smile on the man's face tightened. "You do not understand. She is emotional. She always runs when things get difficult, but she comes back." Ava finally lifted her eyes. They shimmered with rain rather than tears. "I am not coming back." The sentence was barely louder than a whisper, yet it seemed to stop the traffic noise surrounding them. The man forced another laugh, glancing around at the gathering pedestrians as though hoping someone would support his version of the story. "She is confused. She has nowhere else to go." Gabriel noticed something else then. Every time the stranger moved, Ava instinctively shifted farther away, creating distance without even thinking. Fear did not always announce itself with panic. Sometimes it revealed itself through habit, through quiet calculations, through the invisible map someone learned to draw around another person's presence. Gabriel had seen that look before, years earlier, in Family Seeking. Protection after losing everything to men who mistook control for love. He turned slightly toward one of his security men. "Take Miss Brooks' suitcase." The bodyguard accepted it respectfully, without a word. Ava blinked in surprise. No one had ever asked permission through simple kindness before. The stranger stepped forward again, frustration replacing confidence. "You cannot just take her." Gabriel finally allowed the faintest trace of emotion to enter his voice. It was not anger. It was certainty. "I am not taking anyone. She is making her own decision." Silence settled over the sidewalk. Gabriel extended his hand toward Ava, not demanding, not insisting, simply offering. "If you wish to leave, my car is waiting. If you choose to stay, no one here will stop you." For several endless seconds, the city seemed to disappear beneath the steady rhythm of falling rain. Ava looked at the familiar life behind her, then at the unknown future standing before her. Neither promised certainty. Only one offered dignity. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached forward and accepted Gabriel's hand. It was warm despite the cold night, steady without tightening around hers. For the first time in years, someone had offered protection without asking for anything in return. As the Escalade door closed behind them and the city lights faded across the rain-soaked windows, Ava realized she had no idea where she was going. Strangely, that uncertainty felt safer than every place she had ever called home. The drive across the city unfolded in complete silence except for the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the windows and the quiet hum of the engine. Ava sat with both hands folded tightly in her lap, careful not to lean back against the luxurious leather seat, as though she feared leaving any trace of herself behind. Across from her, Gabriel Castellano studied the passing skyline without asking a single question. Most people filled silence because it made them uncomfortable. Gabriel had learned that silence often revealed far more than conversation ever could. 20 minutes later, the gates of the Castellano estate opened without hesitation. Beyond them stood a limestone mansion overlooking Lake Michigan, its warm exterior lights glowing against the storm like a lighthouse guiding ships through darkness. Ava stared through the window in disbelief. The estate looked less like a home and more like something preserved from another century, surrounded by towering oak trees whose branches swayed gently beneath the wind. The vehicle stopped beneath a covered entrance where several household staff quietly waited. No one appeared surprised by Gabriel's unexpected arrival, yet every eye briefly drifted toward the unfamiliar woman stepping from the vehicle with soaked clothes and a weathered suitcase. Gabriel noticed their curiosity before it became judgment. "Miss Brooks is our guest," he said calmly. "Treat her with the same respect you would offer anyone under this roof." The simple sentence changed everything. The staff nodded immediately. An older housekeeper named Eleanor stepped forward with a welcoming smile that carried years of quiet wisdom. "You must be freezing, dear," she said softly. "Let us help you get warm." Ava instinctively opened her mouth to refuse. She had spent years believing that accepting kindness always created a debt she would eventually be forced to repay. But Eleanor simply offered a folded towel and gestured toward the grand staircase without another word. There were no questions, no suspicious looks, no conditions. Gabriel watched Ava disappear upstairs before turning toward his chief of security. "Find out everything you can about the man from tonight," he instructed. "Do not interfere unless he becomes a threat." The security chief nodded once before quietly leaving the room. Gabriel loosened his tie as he walked toward his private study, but his thoughts remained fixed on the woman who had entered his life less than an hour earlier. Something about her refusal to ask for sympathy unsettled him. Most people running from trouble immediately explained themselves. Ava had not offered a single excuse. She had only accepted an open door. Upstairs, Eleanor led Ava into a beautifully furnished guest suite overlooking the lake. Soft cream-colored walls reflected the warm light of a stone fireplace, while neatly folded blankets rested across the foot of an oversized bed. Fresh clothes had already been placed on a nearby chair. Ava stood perfectly still in the center of the room, overwhelmed by a comfort that felt almost unfamiliar. She slowly placed her small suitcase beside the bed before noticing her own reflection in the tall bedroom mirror. Damp curls framed tired eyes that seemed older than her 28 years. She gently pulled back her sleeve and looked at the fading bruise near her wrist before covering it again. "You are safe here," Eleanor said quietly from the doorway, as though sensing the invisible weight Ava still carried. Ava managed a grateful smile, but after the door closed, the room suddenly felt too quiet. She sat carefully on the edge of the bed, listening for raised voices that never came, waiting for footsteps that never approached, expecting another demand that never arrived. Instead, only the gentle crackle of the fireplace answered her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she realized she did not know what tomorrow would bring. Strangely, the uncertainty no longer frightened her. Downstairs, Gabriel stood alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-covered gardens. His phone vibrated with a message from his investigator. The report contained only one sentence. "Ava Brooks is not hiding from her past. She is surviving it." Gabriel read the words twice before slipping the phone back into his pocket, unaware that the greatest mystery had only just entered his home. Morning arrived quietly over Lake Michigan, washing the Castellano estate in pale autumn light that reflected across the still water like brushed silver. Ava woke before sunrise, not because she was rested, but because years of uncertainty had trained her body to expect another difficult day before it even began. For several long moments, she remained perfectly still beneath the soft blankets, confused by the unfamiliar silence surrounding her. There were no footsteps outside her door, no tense voices drifting through the walls, no anxious feeling that she needed to explain herself before breakfast. The peacefulness felt almost unreal. She dressed in the simple clothes Eleanor had left for her and cautiously stepped into the hallway. The mansion was even more breathtaking in daylight. Marble floors stretched beneath elegant chandeliers while portraits of generations past lined the walls with quiet dignity. Everything reflected discipline rather than extravagance. Nothing seemed excessive. Everything seemed intentional. Following the aroma of fresh coffee, Ava eventually found the enormous kitchen where several staff members prepared breakfast together with practiced efficiency. Conversations paused for only a heartbeat before Eleanor smiled warmly. "Good morning, dear. I hope you slept well." Ava nodded politely. "Better than I expected. Thank you." Eleanor simply handed her a steaming cup of tea without asking another question. Across the room, an elderly chef struggled to reach a heavy box stored on the highest shelf. Before anyone noticed, Ava quietly set down her cup and walked over. "Allow me," she said gently. Standing on the small wooden step stool, she carefully lifted the box down and placed it on the counter with a grateful smile. The chef chuckled. "You certainly saved these old shoulders." Ava laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. "My grandmother always said helping takes less energy than watching someone struggle." Eleanor noticed the exchange without interrupting. So did several members of the household staff. None of them saw a frightened stranger anymore. They simply saw a young woman who instinctively noticed the needs of others before her own. Upstairs, Gabriel crossed the second-floor balcony overlooking the kitchen below on his way to the study. He rarely paid attention to breakfast conversations, yet the quiet laughter drifting upward caused him to pause. Leaning slightly against the polished railing, he watched Ava speaking with the chef as though she had known him for years. She accepted nothing special for herself, yet somehow made everyone around her feel seen. Gabriel found that unusual. Most guests spent their first morning admiring the mansion. Ava had noticed the people instead. Later that afternoon, she wandered into the estate gardens where winding stone paths overlooked the shoreline. Brilliant maple leaves floated gently across the grass as cool October air carried the scent of cedar and fresh rain. A golden retriever bounded happily across the lawn before stopping directly in front of her with a tennis ball resting proudly at its feet. Ava knelt instinctively and smiled. "Well, hello there." The dog's tail wagged with unstoppable enthusiasm. Within seconds, the ball had been thrown across the garden, and the joyful chase repeated itself again and again beneath the afternoon sun. From the library window, Gabriel observed the scene while reviewing business reports spread across his desk. His longtime advisor entered quietly carrying a folder before following Gabriel's gaze toward the gardens. "He does not usually trust strangers that quickly," the older man remarked. Gabriel watched the dog happily circling Ava before answering. "Neither do I." His advisor remained silent for a moment before placing the investigation file on the desk. "There is still very little about her past that makes sense." Gabriel closed the folder without opening it. Perhaps that is because everyone has been asking the wrong questions. Outside, Ava looked toward the lake as the cool breeze lifted her curls. For the first time in years, she caught herself smiling without checking whether someone would disapprove. She did not realize that behind the calm beauty of the estate, unanswered secrets were already beginning to move closer with every passing hour. 3 days passed with a quiet rhythm that Ava had almost forgotten life could have. The storm had given way to crisp blue skies, and each morning the waters of Lake Michigan reflected the rising sun like polished glass. Inside the Castellano estate, routines unfolded with calm precision. Staff members moved confidently through their responsibilities. Security teams rotated shifts without unnecessary conversation, and every evening Gabriel returned from meetings with the same composed expression he had worn the day before. Yet despite the predictable order surrounding him, one unexpected detail continued to draw his attention. Ava never behaved like a guest waiting to be served. She naturally searched for ways to make someone else's day easier. If fresh flowers arrived from the greenhouse, she quietly arranged them in the front hall before anyone asked. If Eleanor carried too many folded linens, Ava reached for half the stack without interrupting their conversation. She thanked every employee by name after learning each introduction only once, a habit that surprised people more than expensive gifts ever could. Respect, Gabriel realized, had become her first language even after life had given her very little in return. One afternoon, he entered the estate library expecting silence, only to hear gentle laughter coming from the adjoining sunroom. Looking through the open doorway, he found Ava seated beside Mr. Harrison, the retired groundskeeper who now visited once each week despite worsening arthritis in his hands. An old family photo album rested across the table between them. Harrison smiled as Ava carefully listened to stories about the estate from 40 years earlier, asking thoughtful questions that made the elderly man feel remembered instead of forgotten. She was not pretending to be interested. Gabriel recognized genuine attention when he saw it. Most people waited for their turn to speak. Ava listened as though every memory mattered. Later that evening, Gabriel crossed paths with Harrison as the older man prepared to leave. "She has a rare gift," Harrison said quietly. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" The old groundskeeper smiled toward the front entrance where Ava was helping Eleanor carry a basket of autumn decorations. "She makes people feel like they still have value." The words lingered in Gabriel's thoughts long after Harrison's car disappeared beyond the gates. That night, while reviewing financial reports in his study, he found himself unable to concentrate. Instead, his mind returned to countless powerful people he had known throughout his life. They demanded loyalty through fear, admiration through wealth, and obedience through influence. Ava possessed none of those things, yet within only a few days she had earned sincere affection from nearly everyone under his roof. That could not be purchased. It could only be lived. At the same time, miles away in a downtown office building overlooking the Chicago River, another conversation unfolded under far colder circumstances. The man Ava had left behind stood impatiently before several associates, while photographs from security cameras covered a conference table. One image clearly showed the black Escalade outside the flower shop. Another captured Gabriel stepping into the rain. "Find out who she is staying with," the man ordered, his calm voice unable to hide growing frustration. "She knows things she was never supposed to know." An investigator hesitated before answering. "The property belongs to Gabriel Castellano." The room became unusually quiet. Even among ambitious men, that name carried uncommon weight. The stranger slowly leaned back in his chair, his confidence giving way to careful calculation. He no longer saw Ava as someone running away. She had become a complication connected to one of the most influential men in the city. Back at the estate, unaware of the conversation unfolding across town, Ava stood alone on the lakeside terrace watching the evening sky glow with shades of orange and deep crimson. Gabriel stepped outside carrying 2 cups of hot tea and quietly placed one beside her without speaking. They watched the waves roll toward the shore in comfortable silence until Ava finally whispered, "I forgot sunsets could be this peaceful." Gabriel looked toward the horizon before answering. Peace has a way of reminding people who they were before the world convinced them to become someone else. Neither of them noticed the distant headlights pausing briefly beyond the estate gates before disappearing into the night, leaving behind the unmistakable feeling that the fragile calm surrounding them would not remain untouched for much longer. The following morning began with clear skies, but the calm that had settled over the Castellano estate did not reach Gabriel's private office. His chief of security entered carrying a thin black folder, closing the door behind him with unusual care. "We have confirmation," he said. "Someone has been watching the estate from outside the property line for the past 2 nights." Gabriel looked up from his desk without surprise. The same individual? Different vehicles. Same pattern. The folder contained photographs taken from security cameras positioned beyond the front gates. None of the faces appeared familiar, yet every image suggested careful planning rather than coincidence. Gabriel closed the file. "Increase security, but keep everything discreet. I do not want our guest to feel like she is living inside a fortress." His security chief hesitated before speaking again. "There is something else. Our investigators uncovered financial records connected to the man from the street. His name is Daniel Mercer. Several businesses tied to him are under federal review, but no formal charges have been filed." Gabriel remained silent. Years of experience had taught him that truth rarely arrived all at once. It appeared in quiet fragments that only revealed their meaning when placed together. Meanwhile, Ava spent the morning helping Eleanor prepare donated clothing for a neighborhood shelter supported by the Castellano Family Foundation. As they folded sweaters and winter coats into neat boxes, Ava smiled at every handwritten thank you note that had arrived from previous recipients. "People kept every one of these?" she asked softly. Eleanor nodded. "Kindness has a longer memory than most people realize." Ava carefully placed another folded coat into a box before her expression slowly changed. Through the kitchen window, she noticed an unfamiliar sedan parked far beyond the estate entrance. It remained motionless for several seconds before quietly driving away. She said nothing, but an old feeling returned to her chest, one she had hoped she had finally left behind. That afternoon, Gabriel found her standing alone beside the lakeshore, staring across the water without really seeing it. "Something is bothering you," he said. Ava tried to smile. "It is probably nothing." Gabriel waited. He never rushed silence. Finally, she spoke again. "Sometimes people who spend a long time looking over their shoulder forget how to stop." Gabriel stood beside her, his hands resting inside the pockets of his overcoat as cool lake winds carried the scent of approaching autumn rain. "You are not responsible for another person's choices," he said calmly. "I know," Ava answered, "but I still worry that mine will become someone else's burden." Before Gabriel could respond, his phone vibrated. One brief message appeared on the screen from his security chief. "Daniel Mercer has requested a meeting. He insists it concerns Miss Brooks." Gabriel read the message once before locking the screen. Ava noticed the subtle change in his expression. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He looked toward the quiet shoreline before answering. "Someone wishes to speak with me." "About me?" Gabriel nodded once. Ava lowered her eyes. "Then maybe I should leave before this becomes more complicated." Gabriel turned toward her with the same steady composure she had first seen beneath the rain several days earlier. Complicated situations do not disappear because good people walk away from them. She searched his face, expecting hesitation, but found only certainty. Late that evening, beneath the soft glow of antique lamps inside the estate library, Gabriel instructed his staff to arrange the meeting for the following afternoon in a neutral location. There would be no raised voices, no unnecessary confrontation, only a conversation where every word would matter. As the household settled into another peaceful night, neither Gabriel nor Ava realized that the meeting ahead would uncover a hidden truth neither of them had imagined, one that would change the course of both their lives without a single threat ever needing to be spoken aloud. The following afternoon, the private meeting took place in a quiet conference room overlooking the Chicago River. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the gray autumn sky, while the city moved on outside, unaware that two very different men had come to discuss the future of a single woman. Gabriel Castellano arrived precisely on time, accompanied only by one trusted advisor who remained near the entrance. Across the polished table sat Daniel Mercer, dressed with the same careful confidence he had displayed on the rainy night outside the flower shop. Yet today, beneath the bright daylight, that confidence seemed thinner. Daniel folded his hands together before speaking. "I came because Ava is in danger," he began. Gabriel did not interrupt. He simply watched, allowing silence to invite honesty. Daniel continued, explaining that months earlier Ava had unknowingly discovered irregular financial records connected to one of his business partners. According to him, she had never participated in any wrongdoing, but after asking questions, she became someone others wanted to pressure into returning. "She believes I am the only problem," Daniel admitted quietly. "The truth is more complicated than that." Gabriel listened without revealing what he believed. Years of leadership had taught him that facts deserve patience before judgment. "If what you are saying is true," Gabriel replied, "why did she leave looking frightened instead of protected?" Daniel lowered his eyes. For the first time, he struggled to answer. "Because I handled everything the wrong way. I kept telling myself I was protecting her by making decisions for her. Somewhere along the way, I stopped listening to what she wanted." The room fell silent again. It was not a confession that erased the past, nor was it an excuse. It was simply an acknowledgement that respect could never exist where another person's voice had been ignored. Back at the estate, Ava stood beside the lake watching migrating birds cross the afternoon sky in perfect formation. Eleanor joined her with 2 warm mugs of tea and noticed the distant expression on her face. "You are worried," she said gently. Ava nodded. "I keep thinking that if I had left sooner, maybe none of this would have happened." Eleanor smiled with quiet kindness. People often blame themselves for storms they never created. Those words settled deeply within Ava's heart. As the sun slowly dipped toward the horizon, Gabriel returned to the estate carrying more questions than answers. He found Ava sitting on the terrace wrapped in a light blanket, reading one of the novels from the library. She looked up as he approached. "Did you learn anything?" she asked softly. Gabriel took a seat across from her. "I learned that everyone tells a story that makes themselves easier to understand." Ava closed the book in her lap. "And what do you believe?" He met her eyes with steady calm. "I believe your choices matter more than anyone else's version of them." Ava remained silent for a long moment before taking a slow breath. It was the first time in years that someone had spoken about her future without trying to decide it for her. The realization did not erase every fear she carried, but it gave her something she had almost forgotten existed. It gave her the freedom to believe that tomorrow could belong to her again. The days that followed unfolded with remarkable quiet, but beneath the calm surface, events beyond the estate were beginning to change. Gabriel never announced his decisions, yet people throughout the city quickly noticed that several companies connected to Daniel Mercer's closest associates were suddenly losing investors. Long-standing partnerships were quietly ending, and business arrangements built on secrecy were dissolving one agreement at a time. There were no public accusations, no dramatic confrontations, and no headlines filled with spectacle. Instead, every decision followed the same principle Gabriel had lived by for years. Influence carried the greatest value when it restored order instead of creating fear. Independent auditors began reviewing financial records. Attorneys reopened contracts that had been ignored for years. Community organizations that had once depended on questionable funding accepted new support from legitimate donors, allowing them to continue their work without compromise. Daniel watched the changes unfold with growing disbelief. For the first time in his career, he understood that true power did not always arrive with raised voices. Sometimes it arrived through patience, preparation, and the quiet determination to let truth speak for itself. Meanwhile, Ava continued helping Eleanor organize donations for local families preparing for winter. She knew nothing about the conversations taking place across the city. She only noticed that the uneasy feeling she had carried since arriving at the estate was slowly beginning to fade. One afternoon, Gabriel invited her to walk through the gardens where bright maple leaves drifted gently across the stone pathways. The lake shimmered beneath a clear blue sky, and for several minutes neither of them spoke. Finally, Ava broke the silence. "Everything feels different lately." Gabriel glanced toward the water before answering. "Sometimes the strongest changes happen where they cannot be seen." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Did you do something?" He smiled faintly without revealing details. "I simply made sure that people who wanted honest answers had the opportunity to find them." Ava lowered her eyes. "You did not have to carry any of this for me." Gabriel stopped beside an old oak tree whose branches had witnessed generations come and go. "No," he replied calmly. "But everyone deserves the chance to build a future without living inside someone else's mistakes." Those words remained with Ava long after their walk ended. Later that evening, Daniel requested one final meeting, this time not with Gabriel, but with his own legal counsel present. He voluntarily provided documents that clarified Ava's complete lack of involvement in the questionable business activities surrounding him. The records confirmed what Gabriel had already suspected. Ava had never benefited from those decisions. She had simply been caught too close to people who made them. Within days, the uncertainty that had followed her for so long finally began to disappear. Standing once again on the terrace overlooking Lake Michigan, Ava watched another sunset paint the sky with warm shades of gold and crimson. The weight she carried was not gone entirely, but it no longer defined every step she took. Gabriel joined her quietly, placing 2 cups of tea on the stone railing. Neither of them needed many words. The peaceful silence between them spoke of something far more valuable than obligation. It spoke of trust that had been earned one quiet choice at a time. As the evening breeze carried the last autumn leaves across the garden, both of them sensed that the hardest chapter was finally coming to an end, making room for a future neither had expected to find. Winter arrived gently along the shores of Lake Michigan, covering the gardens of the Castellano estate with a quiet layer of frost that sparkled beneath the morning sun. Nearly 3 months had passed since the rainy evening that had changed 2 lives forever. The mansion no longer felt unfamiliar to Ava. She still greeted every member of the staff by name each morning, still helped Eleanor organize community donations, and still found time to sit with Mr. Harrison whenever he visited to share another story from years gone by. Yet the greatest difference could not be seen in her routine. It lived in the way she walked through each room without looking over her shoulder. The fear that had once followed every step had slowly given way to confidence, one peaceful day at a time. Gabriel noticed the change without ever mentioning it. He understood that healing was not measured by dramatic moments, but by ordinary mornings that no longer felt frightening. One crisp Saturday afternoon, the estate hosted its annual holiday gathering for local families, employees, and neighborhood organizations supported by the Castellano Foundation. Children filled the gardens with laughter, while volunteers served warm meals beneath elegant white tents overlooking the lake. Ava spent hours helping distribute winter coats, smiling as young children proudly modeled oversized scarves and knitted hats. Watching from a short distance away, Gabriel realized that she had become the quiet center of the celebration without ever trying to attract attention. People naturally gathered around her because kindness invited trust in ways authority never could. As the afternoon drew to a close, Eleanor approached Gabriel with a gentle smile. "She has given this house something it has not had in many years." Gabriel looked toward Ava, who was kneeling beside a little girl, carefully tying the child's loose boot lace before sending her back to her family with a warm smile. "And what is that?" he asked. Eleanor answered without hesitation. "Peace." Later that evening, after the last guests had departed and the estate had returned to silence, Ava and Gabriel stood together on the terrace overlooking the moonlit lake. Snowflakes drifted slowly through the cold air, settling across the stone railing. Between them, Ava wrapped her coat a little tighter before speaking. I have been thinking about the night we first met. Gabriel remained quietly attentive. If you had kept driving, none of this would have happened. He smiled softly. Life often changes because someone decides to stop. Ava looked across the frozen shoreline before asking the question that had remained in her heart since that rainy evening. Why did you choose to help me when you knew nothing about me? Gabriel was silent for a moment, watching the gentle waves move beneath the winter moon. Finally, he turned toward her with the same calm certainty she had come to trust. Because from the moment I saw you, I knew one thing. Ava waited quietly. No one should have to face the darkness alone. His words settled gently between them, carrying neither possession nor expectation, only a promise built on respect. Ava's eyes filled with quiet gratitude as she smiled, not because someone had rescued her future, but because someone had reminded her that it still belonged to her. Above them, the first stars appeared across the clear winter sky, while the lights of Chicago shimmered in the distance. The world beyond the estate continued moving as it always had, but inside that peaceful silence, two lives had been forever changed by one simple decision to treat another human being with dignity. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.